And welcome back to the Loyalty Leaders Podcast. I'm David Feldman, Chair of Loyalty Summit, and today I'm joined by Dave Andreadakis, who's the Chief Growth Officer at BWM. Most of you probably know Dave. You've seen him before at Loyalty Summit and at various events around the industry. He's been in the loyalty industry for around 20 years. And Dave has worked on both the client side, the agency side, and seen a lot and is an expert when it comes to loyalty strategy especially. And I wanted to pick Dave's brains about a couple of topics. Dave's going to be joining me in Chicago in September for Loyalty Summit Americas. And we're going to talk a little bit about sort of how things are playing out in the industry and, some trends that we're seeing. But ahead of that, Dave, the first topic I wanted to pick your brains about is, we've had a lot of discussions over time, over the recent years. It comes up at Loyalty Summit all the time, about different generations of customers and members and guests. It was millennials, now it's Gen Z. There's arguments about they're so different, they want different things. Other people will argue, actually, it's all the same things. It just, every generation, it's the same kind of mechanisms. It just looks a little bit different. What's your quick take on, the generational differences we're now seeing when it comes to loyalty programs?
Yeah, happy to be here and always a pleasure to chat with you, David. We could do this for hours. But it's a fantastic topic because, one of the first things I heard when I started in loyalty was somebody was saying, loyalty is dying. And this was, 20 years ago. And every couple of years, I hear something like, oh, the whole world's changing. Everything's, going to be different going forward. And there are principles that absolutely stay the test of time. And millennia over millennia, they continue to hold true in terms of, how people interact. Human behavior doesn't change that much. The context around it does, though. And that's what's happening now is that we're seeing with Gen Z that there is a completely different way in which they want to interact because they have a completely different set of rules and stimulus and alternatives and different ways that they want to spend their time. They've also been brought up to be efficient with that time. And so understanding what's happening with them is really going to help us start to understand how marketing is going to change over time. And there are some pretty interesting indicators in terms of how marketing needs to change. And I think as an industry, we should pay attention to them.
One of the things that is common in these discussions that people will put forward is this desire for immediate gratification. It's a common buzzword. We hear basically anytime we heard it with millennials, we hear it even more with Gen Z, is that they don't have the patience to engage with traditional loyalty programs, and wait for the earning velocity to come around, and it's all about instant gratification. I mean, whatever that sort of means. Do you agree with that take?
I don't like the word patience, and here's why. So I agree with the outcome, but I don't agree with the word patience because patience, is something that's like, I can't wait. I'm not good at being, waiting for the outcome, or the word patience is just kind of indicative of an emotion. That's not what's happening here. The alternatives to what those same individuals can do with their time are more apparent. They're greater. They're at their fingertips. They know how to access them quickly. And so the payoff has to come sooner, or else it's not really going to be worth it to them. Or the payout has to be bigger so that they can say, hey, it's worth giving up many, many more activities and different types of interactions, right? So this slow and steady, I'm going to wait many months before I've saved up or earned enough to maybe get a plane ticket or something like that. They're not interested. That's a whole lifetime away for them. That's many, many decisions away. And so there's ways which brands, even brands that have infrequent purchases, can engage with customers between those purchases and keep them focused on it in an earning, gameful way.
One of the things that occurs to me is, the commentary around this topic seems to follow where the commentator sort of lies in the industry, and what I mean by that is, if your mindset is about, for example, traditional frequent flyer programs, large legacy programs, traditionally, hey, earning velocity, it takes a long time to save up, but the payoff is huge. It's that free flight, hopefully somewhere desirable, ideally in a premium cabin, even though we know most people, redeem down the back of the bus, but it's the lure of that, that first class trip to lay on the beach in a tropical, destination that at least motivates the behavior to take up the co-brand card or consolidate the business, or simply just engage with the program, whatever shape one that might take. But we also know it's going to take a while to save up for that flight. If they're actually a regular traveler, there's the concept of the tier status. So again, it's going to take you a while to climb up through the tiers. You're going to have to consolidate your share of wallet, all the rest of it. But again, at least in theory, traditionally the payoff is huge. You're going to get upgrades. You're going to get, frictionless treatment at the airport and priority this and priority that. We can certainly argue, whether that remains true into the deliverables nowadays. But that's one perspective. On the flip side, you have, perhaps the retail environment, where every retail online store on Shopify that you've never heard of before has a loyalty program now. So you have this commoditization of, honestly, retailers who probably don't and shouldn't have a loyalty program at all. Yeah. They're meaningless. They don't offer anything of particular interest. So you have this dynamic of people are just worn out with being asked to join a program where they can't see any meaningful or enticing value proposition. So I sometimes wonder if when we hear comments about, new consumers don't have the patience for programs, or simply just can't be bothered, or, they want instant gratification. What are we actually talking about? What's the framing here? Is it because they're just bored of being asked to join meaningless programs that shouldn't even exist? Or is it they're truly after something else? And you hinted, just before I head back to you, you hinted a moment ago about alternative ways to keep them engaged if the long tail to a reward, isn't so instant. How does that fit in terms of the framing of the different sort of perspectives of the program and how else they could stay engaged?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I'll stay on airlines for a minute because it's easy to draw some parallels. Well, let's start from, think about kids, and oftentimes you think about video games, right? Well, those kids have grown up and they've become adults and they're now earning. And I grew up in a generation where video games were part of my childhood as well. And so it's very easy to me to make a parallel. But when you think about a lot of games, there's, sometimes a dozen or so currencies that you're earning at any given time. And that allows you to do something, or the games to do something pretty interesting. And that is that while sometimes there's big gaps between earning events on one currency, you can quickly turn your attention to something else. And you can continue to meander around the program, if you will, and find ways to stay interested and stay engaged, so that you can find those events that happen over a long period of time continue to have purpose in your overall ecosystem with the game itself. So let's throw that onto an airline. One of the big problems that airlines face is that they continue to ask customers to do something that matters to the airline versus something that matters to the customer. Accumulating miles or spending a certain threshold doesn't really matter much to me as an individual. How much I spend is kind of a reminder of how much I'm spending. That's not a great feeling. And the miles that I've traveled, well, I mean, that is interesting. It's a score, if you will. But something that was born years ago as a proxy for fuel consumption has almost no relevance now to how much it costs an airline to reward people for the travel that they've just incurred. And so many airlines have moved to a spend level threshold or some other way of starting to calculate, but miles still kind of remain. All right, so fine. So that's the core of the program. What are the alternative currencies that I can add to the program that will be interesting to me as a consumer to keep me engaged? I mean, you travel quite a bit, David, right? Have you ever stopped to see how many airports you've been to? Have you looked at a list of, have I been to this one? Which one am I missing? Right? Imagine an airline starting to keep track of that for you, or which lounges you've been to, or which partners you've engaged with, right? Like, continue to show me all the things that might be interesting to me as a consumer. How about I go to the same restaurant every single time when I'm in Atlanta or something like that? Have I tried a variety of things on the menu? I mean, make this cool to me. Make this cool to me. And then I can start to say, hey, I'm going to purposefully go out of my way to do something, but also I might engage not only in new ways during my trip, especially on short trips, but also off from the trip itself with your partners, maybe a credit program, things like that. And hopefully this makes sense, because I think it does resonate that there's a lot of great, amazing, interesting things having to do with travel that the airline is enabling, and they're not anywhere in the middle of showing me the goodness that they have enabled. That's a great way to engage customers.
And to the point about, sort of say your traditional programs versus this sort of plethora and commoditization, on the retail end. Do you see a difference there, or do you think the mechanisms actually are the same?
You mean in retail versus airline?
Yeah, sort of to the example, every Shopify store seems to have a loyalty program nowadays.
Yeah, retail's a little more difficult. So if you're an everyday purchase type of retailer, like a grocery store, absolutely. There's so many great ways. I mean, some grocery stores have 40 to 50,000 SKUs inside the grocery store. There's a number of ways in which you can create contests and gamification and reward system that aren't actually like the two-tiered pricing or even points that come along with liability. One of the greatest loyalty programs in the world is a collection. And if you've ever been part of collecting something, whether it's baseball cards or Thomas the Tank Engine or something like that, there's just an impulse inside of us to want to accumulate and want more of these things. And there's not necessarily financial reward. Now, some other retailers have a very difficult time because they're not an everyday purchase. They're a very specific purchase, say clothing retailers, specific clothing retailers that are focused around a particular event, say work clothing or something like that. It's not something that you go in and do all the time. And so that's something that you have to be very careful about how you can come up with mechanisms or ways to engage customers. And I find that it's not necessarily currencies that you're going to need to engage them with, but lifestyle. So suppose you're a retailer that allows or that really enables people to get that first wardrobe or that, revitalized self to come to life. I can think of several that I might go to if I really just need to step things up a little. Well, cool. What are all the other things that are happening in my life that you want to be part of, right? So if I'm, say, a Best Buy and I'm sending a kid to school, I can sell them a laptop, or I can be present everywhere that helps that kid go to school. I can make sure that Best Buy credit card is present in all of the purchase. I can make sure that not only am I getting them gaming, but the software that they need, that I'm getting them their laptop, that I'm getting them maybe some clothing that has logos and things that are associated with consumer electronics, so that every time I'm purchasing something that has to do with sending my child to school, even though it's an event, I'm now thinking about Best Buy. There's 1,000 ways to expand the ecosystem from a single purchase into a huge lifestyle type of engagement process.
And then, when I think about, different, it doesn't have to be generational, but when I think about different segments of members in your typical program, we already know, regardless of whether you're a retail program or you're a large frequent flyer program, we know different segments are motivated by different aspects of the value proposition. In the old days, when, we go back 20 years or so, obviously there was, around the world, in certain geographic areas, there is a strong presence of, coalition programs or coalition partners. I like to think of it a little bit of a different way and perhaps avoid the C word and just simply talk about programs that have, a good roster of everyday earn and redemption partners as part of the program, so that it's not just when I take a flight, for example, or it's not just when I'm in the store at that retailer, but there's an aspect where I can continue to engage with the program more broadly in my day-to-day life. Now, the US market's, always a little interesting when you think about that, because I think they stand out with frequent flyer programs as being the odd one out, where you would expect there to be a huge roster of everyday earn and redemption partners. Yeah. It just sort of doesn't. But do you feel is it just part of the cycle that that sort of comes and goes and it's more important, less important? Or do you think there's a generational shift now, not necessarily age generational, but perhaps time so, where we're seeing the importance of partnerships come back to the fore?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there's some inherent problems with coalitions working in the U.S. just in general, largely having to do with geography, right? And so when you think about most coalitions, you've got an airline, which is a national type of partner, so that you can have a destination that you're earning for or something along those lines. But there's usually a grocery store, there's usually a gas station, there's usually some everyday utility type purchases and things like that you can do as well. Well, grocery stores in the U.S. don't really follow a national pattern. We've got very regional grocery stores. We've got very regional fuel stations and convenience chains that sign up for certain types of fuel, and they don't all overlap. And so as they don't overlap, you start bringing in more and more partners of the same type, and there goes your exclusivity. And they're often quite complicated as well. The rollout, because the partnerships tend to not agree on things very easily. So there's a lot of terms and conditions and things. And so signing up becomes quite difficult. And one of the core tenets of loyalty, just in general, is that it has to be easy. It has to be intuitive. It has to be simple. And one of the kind of hidden secrets, when I think about a distribution of customers from your best customer to say your least loyal customer, one of the hidden secrets about loyalty is that the greatest impact that you can have on your results is not finding more extremely loyal customers or trying to convert those who are not a fan. Those are really hard things to do. It's that you've got a lot of customers that are right in the middle, that are on the fence, and you need to nudge them one way or another. They actually aren't that brand loyal to anybody. They're very open as long as somebody can make it more convenient, create a habit, create something that's just easier for them to say yes to. And that's where things work out really well. So when you think about partnerships and coalitions, if there's an easy link to something else, if there's an easy expansion to connecting me to another brand, customers will do that all day long. I can do this and bundle it with that, and I only have to pay one bill. Sounds fantastic. Let's go. More and more, customers are finding the convenience factor in not having to make decisions. And so if you want to bundle things based on convenience to the customer or removal of decisions to just give them something that fits along with who they are, then that's a great place to start as well. So kind of back to the question, what's happening with partnerships? Partnerships became complicated. Well, make them easy again, and customers will follow. Convenience is always, always, always going to be in style.
Yeah, I think it's hard to argue. It's hard to argue with that. I mean, it's about reducing friction, right? I mean, the reality is every point of friction you have, even if it's just enrolling in your program, if there's, if you need 2 pieces of information versus if you need 22 pieces of information, clearly one is going to result in a lot more, incompleted enrollment applications in your program. So, I mean, that's just simply common sense. It sort of leads me to another question. And, I know that you're having, you are hearing these same things in your discussions with people in the industry, whether they're on the agency side or the brand side, the program side. We're a couple of years past the pandemic now.
Right.
Everyone's sort of back in the office. I mean, yes, things don't necessarily look exactly the same as before.
Right.
I think one of the observations, that anyone in directly in the industry is very acutely aware of is teams are nowhere near back to the size that they were in 2019. Loyalty teams are still very, very much skeleton crews. I know that a lot of brands I work with, a lot of professionals I talk to the industry, it's the same story, and it doesn't matter which country you're in right now. The programs are struggling to get things done because they just don't have the resources, whether it's staff, whether it's IT time, budgets, obviously, always an issue, but seem to be, a bit more of an issue now than they were, say, right before the pandemic. I'm assuming you're hearing exactly the same things, but my question to you on this is, one of the comments I hear a lot of is there's a big wish list of brands and programs of wanting to get some projects and initiatives up and running. But it's almost like there's a bit of a holding pattern in the industry right now. And, it might be easy to dismiss to it's an election year or the economic cycle, but that's not restricted. It's not restricted to the US. This seems to be a bit of a global phenomenon right now. So my first question is, are you hearing the same things? And do you sort of have any comments or insights on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not anecdotal at all. This is something that I've spent some time researching. Back when I was in my previous job over at Kobe, we took a look one time and tried to figure out why did we win deals and why did we lose deals. And one of the things that we found interesting was that half of the deals that we didn't win weren't because we weren't good. It was because they were awarded to no one at all. It was awarded to no one, or it was taken completely in-house. And it was interesting that over the years, I kept a pulse on that, and that stayed pretty steady up till the pandemic. And then after the pandemic, I started hearing a lot of things from a lot of providers that were very similar. And that was that, hey, we're engaged in a lot of deals right now, but they're really slow. It's really slow to get to the point where they get to a yes. And so I started reaching out to a few manufacturers, some airline folks that I know, some hotel people as well. Oh, and some banks. And I started hearing something very fascinating. I think that post-pandemic, there was a bubble, a rush to do all the things that they wanted to do over the previous couple of years when everything was just kind of in a complete holding pattern. And so a lot of RFPs were issued, a lot of interest went out there with good intent on awarding these programs out to different agencies and that. But they learned something along the way. As they started hearing more and more from the different providers, they started realizing the tax that it was going to put on their technology teams, on their own loyalty strategy teams, and so on and so forth. And so their wish list of great things that they wanted to do would either take too long to implement before they could show a return on investment, or they just simply didn't have the resources internally, and they were trying to figure out how to make all of these things happen. I know these things sound like very similar things that happened before the pandemic, but what's happening after that pandemic is that number has moved from 50% up to about 80% of deals. And so that's very interesting to see that many of these companies are slowing down their awarding of these programs to different agencies because they simply aren't going to see the return, or they don't have the resources that they need to pull this off. And part of that challenge that has to go back to the agencies is you have to show quicker return on investment, maybe bite-size some things up a little bit, but also some things that you're going to have to do is to show more value early. Without showing the value early, you're not going to be able to continue to fund or continue to develop the program up. And that's entirely doable. Oftentimes in the past, there's been these big, long implementations. We're seeing coming up from the bottom a lot of challengers to the loyalty market that were kind of throwaways in years past. There were small technology and software startups that weren't meaningful, but their capabilities are getting stronger and stronger as technology improves. And so showing value early in your implementations is critical to a long-term relationship, and most importantly, communicating that throughout the sales process is what's going to lead you to the wins.
It's interesting you mentioned about all these additional players in the industry. I mean, I think it's the flip side of what we said earlier about every Shopify store having a loyalty program, right? It's also about the barrier to entry for a startup that wants to do business in the loyalty sector is lower than it ever has been. And I mean, you could argue that creates a few other dynamics. There's, on one aspect, there's a lot of noise, and it's a problem sorting wheat from the chaff. But it also means that there are new solutions out there to perhaps overcoming some of the, we always talk about the legacy tech problems, and challenges. Yeah. We were talking about those 30 years ago. We're still talking about them today. No doubt we'll talk about them in 20 years still. But there's new solutions and opportunities now that didn't exist, a few years ago. And that's not even getting started on new technologies. Obviously, there's a lot of, we don't need to jump into the buzzwords on this discussion. Putting all that together, some of the challenges that we're facing, like you say, the resource congestion, or bottlenecks, I think clearly is, I don't know if we'd be bold enough to say it's the number one issue, right now this year. I mean, I certainly think it's up there. In the first, in the top one or two or three. Are there any other sort of things that we sort of haven't highlighted that you think, should be something that loyalty practitioners, or industry practitioners should be thinking about, and that obviously we can certainly go into a lot more detail in Chicago.
Absolutely. In fact, I can't wait till we get to Chicago because we can, spend a lot of time on these topics. But I'll give you two that I think they need to be considering. And needs to be part of their product roadmaps, and definitely needs to be part of their sales process. And this isn't just a message to, to the agencies that are out there. This is a message to all the brands that are looking to, find great agencies, is, partner with them, look to help influence their roadmaps to this extent as well. So the first thing is that a lot of times what's happening is that agency partners out there have, great functionality, but the world of interacting with the customer has completely changed from how it was 10 years ago, and maybe even 5 years ago. 10 years ago, a lot of things were done by email and text, and that's just not how consumers are interacting with virtually anything anymore. Right now, there's a lot of things that are on social channels that are community driven. There's a lot of technology that's happening in terms of interacting directly with a device instead of having to, point and click. In fact, in 2020, something interesting happened. More searches were done through voice than they were through somebody typing into Google asking it something. And half of the devices that were spoken to didn't even have a screen on it. And so when you're asking, what functionality a technology is providing, does it take it all the way to how the consumer really wants to interact with the brand? And so I say that to the agencies and the brands alike is, expand away from, traditional thinking about what loyalty agencies are there to do and pull them closer to the actual touch point of the customer. And the second part is mirrored right to that. And that is, what are all of those ways in which you can interact with customers? Everything needs a facelift. If you go to your product pages and if you do some great work sending a customer to a website and they look at a product page and it's boring text and it's a still image, that's not how anybody wants to interact anymore. I mean, they're on TikTok, they're on Instagram, you're seeing video after video after video. Remember when you were a kid and you'd watch movies and occasionally they'd come in with a slideshow, and that slideshow is this boring thing from the 80s and 70s? That's how it feels to a younger generation right now when they see a still image on a website. You've got to really liven that up with video. And it's not just making that come alive. Make it shoppable video. Like, make that experience on a website feel as if they were amidst a social media type of engagement. The other thing is we've got to soften our sales conversation. There's still a lot of things that sound, very, buy now and act now and hurry. That's not how Gen Z wants to interact. They want to discover the value themselves. Otherwise, they don't trust it. And again, we said early on that, Gen Z tends to be the canary in the coal mine for how the rest of the generations are going to follow. So we all want that convenience. We all want that trust. So if you want to build loyalty from the initial purchase and any follow-on purchases, you've got to find engaging ways for them to have self-discovery. It's got to be natural. Video has to be part of it. And don't make them come to you, and don't put them on a path that they have to follow your rules. Show them a way that they can meander through and discover what they want to be interested in. And then, of course, you've got to listen and give them more of those opportunities.
Dave, I think we could deep dive into all of those points. We'll be here for another half an hour, just scratching the surface. But we do have some time in Chicago, to talk about this. Not just ourselves with our own session, but all the sessions coming together on the agenda. I'd encourage everybody, if you haven't taken a look yet, keep an eye on LoyaltySummit.com. 17th and 18th of September in Chicago, Loyalty Summit Americas. It's going to be a fantastic couple of days. A lot more in-depth discussions on these very topics. Dave, thank you so much for your time today. And I know I'm going to have more questions, and I'm looking forward to discussing them with you further.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. See everyone in Chicago.
Thanks, Dave.